Good morning and welcome to our webinar today. Today we have a very special guest, Corey Parker. And before we dig in, I'm going to take a few minutes here just to welcome everyone while people get logged in. I see a few people are joining us. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on what side of the coast you're on. So glad that you could join us here today. A few more popping in. Before we get started today, I'll quickly introduce myself and then I'll introduce our guest speaker. I'm Kristin Tyler. I'm an attorney and I'm one of the co-founders of a company called LAWCLERK. My practice has been in estates and probates in Las Vegas, Nevada for the past, I guess I got barred 14 years ago now. So that's my background. And then about 3 years ago, with the help of two partners, started a legal tech company called LAWCLERK, and that's why we're here today. So at LAWCLERK, we are helping busy attorneys all over the country get more work done thanks to our network of freelance lawyers. We have just under 3,000 freelance lawyers in all 50 states and all areas of specialty that can help you get more work done. And one of the things I love most about what I do with the work at LAWCLERK is connecting with attorneys and hearing about the different ways that we're helping them find new levels of success. And certainly there is really when we think of some of our most successful attorneys at LAWCLERK, there really are very few that are any more successful than Corey Parker, who's joining us today. So Corey, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm so glad that you're spending some of your valuable time with us today. And so before I give you the chance to introduce yourself, let me just give a little bit of your background. So Corey is a graduate of the University of Washington, and straight out of law school, he went to work for the public defender. So he was working in the area of criminal law. After a few years of that, he then transitioned into a solo practice as a criminal attorney. And if I remember right, you said your wife also helps out with the practice, right? So it's family business.
Correct.
And then a few years down the road, after working in criminal defense in private practice, he took the California bar, moved to California, where he's then runs his own office. He has now transitioned into really having a high-end appellate practice. It's a virtual firm, or largely virtual, and he does still practice in Washington State and California. And one of the really exciting things about Corey is he's got a really unique entrepreneurial mindset that a lot of attorneys don't have, or that a lot of us are trying to improve. And I know I hear a lot of attorneys talk about wanting to grow a business with their firm, something that maybe someday they could sell. And believe it or not, even though I don't see a single gray hair on Corey's head, he's already done that at a young age and early in his career. He built up his appellate practice, sold it last year, and he attributes some of their success to the work that he's done with our freelancers at LAWCLERK. And the new owner of the firm does continue to use LAWCLERK as well. So Corey's got just a wealth of knowledge and information about the business of the practice of law that he can help us dive in today. And we're so glad that you joined us. Now, if along the way you have questions for Corey, go ahead, drop them in the chat, and we'll do our best to address those today. And if we don't get to all of them, I'll try to do my best to follow up with you later on. But Corey, I gave a brief introduction. Please tell us a little bit more about you if you want to hit the personal side of things.
Sure thing. And I really appreciate the introduction, Kristin. I guess I would describe myself as entrepreneurial, but I think it came out of necessity, essentially, because I was, like a lot of attorneys, very unhappy with my practice and with practicing law in general. You know, it was very stressful. I was working on the weekends. I was working in the evenings. It was occupying my whole life as I tried to build my practice. And so kind of out of necessity, especially when my son, who's now almost 2.5, was born a couple of years ago, kind of had this moment of, I need to do something about this. That, I don't want to always be working. I don't want to always, be stressed out around my son. And I decided to kind of make a change. And, I would look around and go to different places. I'd go to Starbucks and be like, gosh, maybe I should just be a barista. Maybe I'd be happier. Maybe I should just try some, getting out of the law completely, because being a lawyer just isn't fun. It's stressful. And I think I realized that it doesn't have to be that way. It's not inherently a horrible profession. It is inherently, there are inherent stresses. You're entrusted with a lot, but it doesn't have to be that way if you don't make it and you take steps to kind of get out of that cycle. So I had 3 main goals really in turning things around. One was just to reduce stress as much as possible, not be spending my day putting out fires, meeting last minute deadlines. Number 2, grow the practice and be more profitable, which it's kind of strange to try to strive for both. You're thinking, well, how do I reduce stress and grow? Because if I'm growing, don't I have to be even more stressed or working even more to make that happen? And then the third is just kind of having time for my family and having a work-life balance that I didn't really have before. And I think fortunately, after probably making every mistake that you can make, I was able to accomplish that. And I think it just came from, generally doing a lot on the front end, planning and organizing and not doing things at the last minute. And number one, I feel like was just kind of eliminating the guilt that came with not doing everything yourself. As attorneys, we kind of the traditional view is that, hey, if the client hires you, you need to be doing everything from A to Z on that client's case. And I think that I felt, like many attorneys, some guilt around delegating. Like, well, hey, the client hired me personally. They're trusting me personally. I can't just delegate this work. And I realized that, the client wants you to work in their best interest, regardless. The client expects you to do whatever you can to improve their chance at winning their case, whatever it might be. And if that means finding somebody that actually, frankly, has better credentials than I do, worked with attorneys that were Ivy League attorneys, worked with attorneys who were first in their class with LAWCLERK, who were
really? Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, there were a lot of attorneys like that out there, and just being able to kind of delegate and have that trust that I could do that, and being upfront with the client about it. It wasn't like it was this secret where I was saying, well, I'm going to tell the client that I'm doing all the work and I'm going to delegate this to another attorney and then I'm going to take credit for it. The client actually likes when you tell them that you're going to have other eyes on their brief or on their project, or they would prefer it because you're just one person. And if you explain that to them and say, look, I have a contract attorney I work with or multiple contract attorneys I work with, these are their credentials. This is what they've done for me in the past. I trust them because they really know this area of civil litigation that's on appeal for you, or this area of criminal law that's nuanced, which was all true. Clients like that. They didn't see it as a negative. They saw it as a positive.
I love that. And, you're not the first attorney that's told us that. And I hear that. I have 2 points I want to make. Number one, time and time again, I hear from attorneys who say they hesitate to delegate because they feel like the client hired them and they have to do all the work. And that's simply not the case, as you're explaining. And so I want to just double check. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. The second point is we actually have another attorney that we work with in Arizona. Well, that was interesting. Are we still there?
Yep, you're back.
Okay.
Cut off
I have
Arizona.
no idea what just happened. Anyways, I was talking about, we have another attorney in Arizona who actually his clients now have come to request some of their favorite contract attorneys that he works with. Obviously, this attorney, he's still the quarterback of the case. He's calling the shots. He's going to court hearings. He's handling negotiations. But he has a number of clients who have been so impressed with the brief writing and research skills of some of the freelancers that they now say, hey, can you have that same person on LAWCLERK that wrote that last motion write this one? And so I agree with you. I think that clients are comforted to know that you're not doing this alone. You've got a dedicated, highly skilled team all working towards the same goal of the best possible outcome on their case. So I just think that's a great point of eliminating any of that guilt for not doing the work yourself.
I think quarterback's the best way to put it. And you wonder, well, how would I have the time to organize this and delegate things when I have all this work? And the answer is, once you do start delegating, you'll be amazed how much of your time frees up. You all of a sudden have time to look ahead, to organize, because you're not in the thick of everything. You're not in the trenches. And you have to do that if you want to kind of have that space to kind of work on that big brain, those matters and manage your firm. If you're in the thick of everything, you don't realistically have time to do that.
Absolutely. I wanted to get into that a little bit because I know that's something that every attorney is challenged with, getting organized, staying organized. And, what are the things you you do or that you've done that, I'm a big fan of like, what can I do today that will make my life a little easier tomorrow or a week from now or 2 weeks from now? And obviously delegating a lot of tasks to get them off of my own to-do list is one of the best ways to do that. So Corey was so nice. He actually sent me a very, really nicely organized document where he shares some of his top insights, and a number of them deal with organization and staying on top of things. So let's dig into that a little bit. So, what are some of the ways when you're working with a number of freelance lawyers, because that could get confusing. How have you gotten organized to keep track of the freelancers, what they're working on, who's done a good job so you can go back to them in the future?
Right. And I think a big part of it is kind of delegating it right away, because it's getting up against those deadlines that makes things the most stressful. So if you are dealing with a response and the other side files a response, you should delegate the reply to that response the same day you receive the response. That way you have that lead time. And I even on top of things would ask for an extension because the courts generally will rubber stamp that first extension of time, with whatever modality, litigation.
And you're talking again in your appellate practice?
Yes, in the appellate practice, or I would say even in litigation, it's pretty common, I would argue, or in criminal defense, that first extension of time or motion for continuance is going to be granted. So I would take advantage of that. I would get that first extension. So not only would I have 30 days, maybe then I would have maybe 60 days. And then I would delegate it right away so that I would have a writer that maybe would turn something around within a week or a week and a half. And I had 60 days before it was actually due at the court. So that gave plenty of lead time for potentially that writer to, if something came up, to reassign it, which fortunately hasn't happened with me, but I know that it's always a possibility and I want to account for that. Or the possibility of the client having suggestions and corrections needed to be made, or putting finishing touches, on everything. And so one of the things that I really try to do is classify and kind of rate the writers in a way internally, so I kind of know who I'm dealing with. So
okay,
I would have, like, let's say if I had a time sensitive project and because the client hired me at the last minute, there was nothing I could do. There was no way I could push it out. I would want that writer that I've worked with before that I know is going to come through. They're fast. They've come through on a number of projects. It may be a little pricier to do that, but it's well worth it having that peace of mind. And then I may have a writer that really knows criminal law and that maybe is a little creative and can kind of look into some issues that aren't really necessarily inside the box because sometimes that's what the client wants to see or that's what's involved. Whereas other writers don't really know how to do that. They really just want to go by the book. And so I would rate all of the writers in a way to do that. But getting to your question of organization, really delegating things at the first moment so that you have the time to organize. And then just having a list of each one of your projects, each one of the writers assigned. And there are other little things, kind of checklists that you have to have for yourself. Like, do you have the record associated with this case? On an appellate brief, you have to know that you have the record, or whatever it is, you have to make sure that you have the materials that you're giving to any writer and it's ready to go. So as I said, if you delegate as much as you can, you have that time to really make that chart and be the quarterback and go through and kind of see, okay, October 15th, this brief is coming up internally for this writer to get it to me, but it's not due with the court until November 15th. So, I first of all have to remind myself and kind of have a tickler to make sure that the writer gets it to me. Because if the writer is busy or engaged in other things, I don't want that to fall off the radar. So it's important to remind yourself that the writer is going to be delivering something on such and such day. And frankly, I think LawClerk does a good job, with the actual platform. You can kind of go and see a chart of the deadlines and who's assigned. Right. You can kind of use that as a guide, but I would transfer that to kind of my own list and kind of just a concise cheat sheet that would allow me to kind of look ahead and see what's due. And once you kind of have assigned everything, then you can more focus on the big picture. You can focus on your communication with the client, et cetera.
I love that. A couple of points I want to chime in on that is, number one, if anyone listening does happen to have Clio as a practice management, we do an integration with Clio where we sync the deadlines and the tasks and the things that you've assigned to the freelancers to your calendar automatically. So that's a big time saver if you happen to be a Clio user. We have more integrations in the works, but for now, that's the only one we have. And I also want to point out that I think a lot of the things that Corey's talking about, even though he has an appellate practice where maybe sometimes he has deadlines that are 30 or 60 days out, those would apply if you're in state court. If you're in state court, you filed your motion, you get your opposition back from the opposing counsel, and you have 5 days to write a reply brief. Same thing applies. If you've got a qualified team of freelancers ready to go, pick one of them, assign that reply brief right away. And, maybe if you've even worked with maybe someone helped you write the initial motion itself, it's great to go back to them for the reply brief. So Corey, do you take advantage of our Teams feature in LawClerk? And if so, do you use it do you use the same LawClerk on the whole case, or how do you use that feature?
Yes, and that's always the goal is, if you have someone that, let's say, drafts an opening brief, you want that same writer to draft the reply brief because they're not starting from scratch. So economically, you're going to get a better price.
For sure.
Because they don't have to reinvent the wheel. They don't have to start from the beginning. They know the case, and they can usually write it a lot more quickly because they've already done the legwork in connection with the opening brief. So when it comes to the reply, they're just kind of reviewing the response and tearing it apart. So that, in a rebuttal. So I do think that that's key is trying to use the same writer, having them on your team. And I find that the law clerks are very appreciative of that. They appreciate being added to the team. They feel invested in you. They feel committed. And a lot of times they have interest in the case, and sometimes they want to hear what happens with the case. So if I,
that's interesting. Yeah.
So I'll give them a heads up, here's the opening brief. I appreciate you drafting this. The reply brief is probably going to, be due in a few months. Once I receive the response brief, I'll give you a heads up when the response brief comes, and and hopefully you'll be available, which they almost always are. Especially again, going back to lead time, if you give them lead time. If you have a writer you really like using, they're on your team, you give them advance notice. They're usually going to make sure that they're free to help you. If they're really good, they may have a lot of other projects going. But if you give them that lead time, they're going to be available for you. So I would say definitely going back to the well with that same law clerk that you've used before is crucial. And it's always the best practice.
It is. I mean, it helps the freelancer get to know the client the same way that you and your immediate team are. And I think that might be, if you don't mind, I might take a moment here to ask, because I think people are always curious to hear, yes, you're working with LawClerk, but you have other team members as well. Could you give us an idea of kind of the structure of your firm and how it's, how many on the team? Are you 100% virtual? Like over the last 3 years, kind of what has been the status of the firm?
Yeah, sure. So in, around 2014, I started working with my wife, and we converted to just a purely virtual firm. So I had an office where I did meet with clients from time to time. If they wanted to meet at a conference room, I had that available.
Okay.
But it was really just my wife and I, sometimes in an office, sometimes on the couch, working on these, a lot of times our caseload was 100 to 150 cases.
And is she also an attorney?
No. So my wife is not an attorney. She really wasn't trained in any capacity, but she was essentially served as the legal assistant, case manager, and she was great at it. We had good communication, and because we were delegating, we were able to kind of look ahead and be prepared. And it seemed insane with the traditional view that I grew up with, and when I worked at a law firm early on, that could even exist. You had to have a physical brick and mortar office. You had to have associates, and especially to take on that many cases. But LawClerk, kind of created an ability for me to essentially have a staff as if they were there. I mean, what's really the difference between them physically sitting in chairs in your office and sitting in their pajamas in their basement working on the briefs? At the end of the day, the work product is the same, and you have that support. Before I started working with LawClerk, and not to sound like an infomercial here, but this is genuine. I was working with first of all, I was doing everything myself. So initially, I want to put that out there. I was writing all the briefs myself. I really enjoy writing briefs, but after a while, it wasn't sustainable. When I grew enough and I had a lot of cases coming, there was no way that I could personally write every single brief. It just, was impossible. I would have to be working 24 hours a
You'd
day.
have to turn clients down, and you didn't want to do that.
Exactly, right. And so I would work with contract attorneys that I found online, that I cultivated relationships with, but they were oftentimes expensive. They kind of had their own practice. They had a standard of a fee that they wanted to meet. And could often be north of $5,000, to hire someone to write an opening brief or a reply brief, and it just didn't make my practice profitable, and I understand that they held to that price, and I understand, that everybody can hold to the price that they want to hold to. But I was finding that on a lot of cases, I was essentially kind of breaking even. I was paying a writer either the same fee or a little under the fee that I was receiving for the case, and obviously that was not beneficial.
Doesn't cover your time, yeah.
Right. So when I got to LAWCLERK, it was the beauty of it, which I don't see anywhere else, is that I could set the price. I could set the price based on the fee that the client paid and based on what was going to make the firm profitable. And there were probably a lot of attorneys that maybe weren't willing to accept that fee. And fine, they didn't accept the project.
Right.
But the ones that were, because it made sense to them, there are a lot of attorneys I found that are, semi-retired, and they enjoy taking on projects on the side, but they're very skilled. There's some attorneys that are, just getting into the practice, and they want experience, and they want to cut their teeth on briefs, and there's a lot of people in between who just are really good brief writers. They move quickly, and they're happy to do things, for an economical rate. I mean, I found that a lot of attorneys really hate the traditional model. They don't want to be in a practice. They don't want to be an associate. They don't want to go into an office. They love the fact that they can work, from their pajamas, in their house or on vacation or wherever they're working from, as long as they deliver a good work product. And so that, I think, is why those attorneys feel that they can charge what they charge, because they would rather be doing that there's no overhead for them. They can turn a big volume. So that was the real game changer, where I went from, being profitable to getting to a point where I was so profitable that I could sell my law firm, and that someone was interested in purchasing the law firm because of that gap between, what the client paid and what I was spending on help.
I think that's just such a powerful story. And a couple of things I want to point out there is Corey lives in a world where you do, I think, all of your work on a flat fee basis, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
that's right.
For anyone who still is operating on an hourly basis, don't be put off by the fact that we do price our projects on LawClerk at a flat fee price. Your advisor through LawClerk is there to help you with the pricing, and we have a ton of resources on that. So don't let the flat fee thing throw you for a loop. I mean, Corey is a testament to the fact that you can find great work at a flat fee rate. Number two, there is so much work in this legal industry. And I think you really hit on it well there, where you were saying, you worked with other writers in the past who, for a multitude of reasons, demanded larger fees. Through our platform, you were still able to find quality help, but at a different price point for whatever reasons that may be. I want to make sure and point out here too, that Corey has always been one of these attorneys who pays very fairly. And in fact, you've sometimes increased your fee to someone, you've offered bonuses when they've done a good job. Like he does not nickel and dime people. He pays top rates for quality work through our site. And so I just want to point that out, that you've really mastered that skill, and we commend you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we had one question that came in, and might as well take a look. I don't know if you can see that on your screen, Corey, but this is from Nick, and she wants to know, how do you handle delegating when you're dealing with a more niche practice, like a specialty practice? I'm just going to read through it. Do you look for someone with that exact expertise, or do you think parsing for different components of the matter, analysis or writing or research, makes more sense?
I think that's a really good question. So I guess with respect to parsing things out, I wouldn't advise it. And the reason for that is because if you're going to spend the money to delegate, and you are going to entrust someone to work on the case, you want, if possible, and I found that it is possible, you want the whole enchilada. You want them to deliver you a final work product that I call it a ready to file brief. And I would classify it that way with the writers, that, I'm looking for a ready to file brief. And again, there's a lot of this feeling I had initially of like, am I asking too much? Am I, is this realistic? But you know what? You never know until you ask. And frankly, no one has said no. There's always been someone on LawClerk because there's so many people looking for work that have picked it up, that have picked up the project and have gone the distance. And part of what I would advise is to give them everything that you can upfront. And I say, help them help you, kind of a Jerry Maguire reference.
Exactly. Yes.
Give them the best template that you have. Give them the court rules. Give them, some clear instructions on formatting, how it should be structured. But the most important thing I think that a writer is looking for is a really good template that they can take that template, they can work from it, and they can essentially recycle it. Because I think in any area of law, yes, there's a nuance, and there's especially a nuance with that case, and they're going to have to do analysis with that case. But if they see the bones of it, how it's structured, how the margins are supposed to be, the tables, everything in that respect, then you want them to do the whole project. Because I think what I found is when I parsed it out and I said, okay, I'm going to have them draft the brief, but if they give it to me in a mess, that's fine. I'll prepare the tables, I'll prepare the proof of service, I'll finalize it, I'll go through and proofread it. But that ended up being a lot of work for me, to where I was getting to the point where I was saying, well, why don't I just write this brief myself? Because on the back end, I'm spending hours correcting it and making it perfect. But if you don't tell the writer that's what you want, if you don't say, I want a ready to file brief, here's what you need to do, here's what I need, then I couldn't expect them to deliver that. In their mind, they're thinking, well, they just want the brief, but they're going to take care of the rest on their end. Maybe they have a staff that does the tables, maybe they have a staff that does that. So as far as parsing things out, I wouldn't recommend it because I think it just creates more work for you. But as far as a niche type of area of law, I think that from what I've found, I've done all kinds of different post-conviction work in different states, different civil types of appellate cases, and there always seems to be someone who is equipped to handle it. There always seems to be someone out there that I found on LawClerk who has that, to some degree, they have that knowledge and that skill. They've worked on that type of case before, and if you give them the template and the tools they need, they'll be able to deliver. And maybe that first project won't be perfect with that writer. Maybe you find someone, they're in that field of law, but they don't know every nuance. And so you kind of maybe hold their hand a little bit that first time, but then the next time you keep going back to them. They've done it with you before. You maybe had to hold their hand that first time, but from then on, they've got it. So I definitely would recommend that you put it out there and you see if you get any bites. There's no harm
For sure.
in doing that. And a lot of times you'll be amazed with how many people are willing to accept the project.
For sure. And we do in the question too, Nick, it sounds like maybe you practice in the area of nonprofit law, working with charities. If that's the case, we have another top user who's used this extensively in that area of law. And I'd be happy to connect with you, or you could talk with your advisor. We could look at some of the freelancers that attorney's worked with and try to connect you for that type of work. So definitely we have expertise in that area of practice, and would definitely encourage you to reach out and let us help you find the right people. So let's go back to so one of the ways that I think you've succeeded is you've been very good at communicating and giving very clear directions to your freelancers. And that's obviously the first step, is to take the time to invest in giving the freelancer the detailed instructions they need to do good work. Time and time again, when I'm talking to lawyers, and I want you to address this first, and then we'll talk about some of your more specific techniques for setting up the project for success. But I talk to so many lawyers and they're like, oh, it takes too much time to delegate, I'll just do it myself. Like, do you ever catch yourself thinking that, or are you just so far past that because you've mastered this skill?
Absolutely. I did that all the time. I used to do that all the time. And
do that all the time. Okay.
Yeah. And there are times where I sometimes feel that way, but then I start getting into it, and halfway in, I'm like, gosh, I should have delegated this. Why am I doing this?
Why am I doing this? Yeah.
I had that feeling a lot of times because I know that someone out, and also I know that someone out there is going to benefit from it. Someone's going to get an experience. Someone's going to get compensated. And that's a good feeling, is being able to kind of give someone else work. So yeah, I
For
definitely
sure. And I'm sure there's plenty of other things you should be doing that are a better use of your time. When you look at your practice, what do you think are the core, responsibilities that you have that should be you doing it, that you shouldn't delegate?
Right. So I think that obviously communicating with the client is key. communication is it's so hard for a solo attorney to effectively communicate with their clients and do all the work themselves. And that is the biggest complaint about attorneys. When I talk to people who are looking to hire a firm or existing clients who worked with attorneys before, the biggest complaint about attorneys is I cannot get them on the phone. They don't get back to me. They're not responsive. And when I look at reviews from attorneys, that's usually the complaint. If you look at a review, so-and-so didn't get back to me. Now, look,
Right.
maybe that was unwarranted. Maybe it was unreasonable. There are clients out there that expect a lot and that are unreasonable. And there's no
Sure.
doubt about that.
No
But
doubt.
if it's really, really hard, a lot of times the client would rather be in the know and know what's going on and know that you're available to talk to them and answer their questions than hey, I don't have time for you because I'm working on your case. I'm drafting your work product, so I don't have time to get back to you. Clients don't like that, and maybe that is in their best interest, but they don't see it that way, And that's been my experience after doing this for a long time, is that you can do an amazing job for a client. You can author an amazing, stellar brief with the best case law in there, and if they don't know what you're doing and they didn't feel like you communicated with them, they're at the end of the day not going to be happy with your service. So I think that I think that frees you up to provide a good service to your client, to communicate with them, make sure they know what's going on. And then of course, like with appellate law, oral argument, or court appearances in general, whatever field of law, you have the time to really prepare. You're the face of that case. You go into court, you zealously advocate for your client. And it really opened me up to be able to prepare, and to be able to kind of plan and outline how that argument is going to go versus coming in there burnout from, writing the brief all week. It's,
burning the midnight oil. Yeah.
Yeah, right. It's really hard to do everything. It just is. I think it's impossible. And solo attorneys I see struggle because then you have all the administrative parts of your work, and you have the business side of things. And how can you possibly do it all? And some people say, well, I can't just go out and hire 5 associates. And of course not. I mean, I get that. You can't just, in a perfect world, we'd all love to do that. But I think that this creates a nice solution where you can afford to delegate regardless of how your practice is going, because there are people out there that are willing to help.
I love that. Okay. So once you get out of your mental roadblock of it takes too much time to delegate, and you realize you're better off doing that to free up your time for these other things, client communication, strategy, court appearances. So Corey, when you are taking that time to delegate, and I know that you now do it very efficiently, very, in a time conserving manner, what are some of the things that you do in terms of giving clear instructions, forms, information from the client? Tell us all the good things.
Yeah, and kind of getting back to communication and the importance of that. What you want to avoid a lot of times, and I think this is a pain point for a lot of people, is that back and forth with the client. Client asks you a question, you respond to the client. Client asks another question, you respond. You could spend all day, every day doing that. And especially if you have a number of clients, that can be time consuming, and it's not a good workflow. So what I found works really well is you get the client to give you all of their questions, all of their input on the case, because most of them have input.
Oh, I'm sure.
I do have a lot of conversations of, with an appeal, for example, we can't use anything that's outside of the record. We're limited to the trial record. Someone will say, well, I have this new evidence that I want to use. You can't do that. So what I'll often do is we'll give them a letter at the beginning of the representation that kind of tells them, this is what an appeal is. This is what we can't do. And if they ask a question about it, I kind of refer them back to that letter. Like, look, remember that letter I sent you that said we can't go outside of the record on an appeal? You should refer back to that.
Really meant it. I wouldn't have sent you the letter otherwise.
Right. But what I found to be probably the biggest game changer is getting all that information from the client, getting their questions, getting their input, and then delegating. When you're delegating to the law clerk, you not only give them the information for the project, but you also give them those client comments. So I would have a form, and I would tell the client, fill out this form, just let me know everything that you think is important. Realistically, most of them would be 1 to 3 pages. Occasionally you have that client that gives you 12. You try to hope that those are few and far between, but you give that to the writer then, and you say, and I would say, in addition to providing me the brief, please provide me a memorandum written to the client addressing all of their questions and answering all of their questions, or addressing all of their input rather. So if they say,
Oh, that's great.
there was something in the case that I thought it wasn't fair because I saw the judge was nodding off, during closing argument, and it looked like the judge was falling asleep. Well, the person who's looking into the case can look at it and will be able to write back the law clerk and say, maybe it's unfair that you perceive the judge falling asleep, but this is nowhere on the record. There's nowhere in the record that anybody said or objected to or preserved this issue of the judge potentially falling asleep. Here's case law about preserving the record. And so when I give the draft back to the client, which is way in advance of the actual deadline, right?
Okay.
So they're happy. They know that the deadline for this brief is December 1st.
Under control. Yep.
Right. They're getting a draft on October 15th. They think, wow, we're way ahead. And we're giving them all the feedback or the memorandum, this well-written memorandum from a law clerk who, it's not that much of a leap for them to do the memorandum because they've already drafted the brief. So they've already dug into the record. They've already, articulated all of these ideas. So they understand exactly what the client is asking, and then they can address it. And so when I give that back to the client, a lot of times that's pretty much it for the client communication because I've addressed everything. I've told them, give me everything up front. I'm going to address it all in this response to you. And then they've kind of have all their questions answered, and it discourages them from in between constantly feeling like they need to contact you and ask all these questions because you set those boundaries early and you say, give me everything you've got. I will answer every one of your questions, but I'm going to do it in this fashion. And I rarely have a client that has a problem with that because they're so appreciative that you did answer their questions in detail and you took the time to address everything. And that's another big complaint about attorneys. Yep. A lot of times clients feel like, well, the attorney didn't listen to me. I had some good input on the case. And maybe their input was frivolous and maybe it wasn't something that you could use. But if they don't feel like you addressed it, if you wrote a great work product and you advocated for them as best you could, they may not feel satisfied at the end because you didn't listen to their important question.
For sure. So much of what we do is how we make our clients feel along the way. Yes, the outcome is important, but they're also got to remember the relationship and the working experience. So, I just love this idea of having the law clerk also take the time. Corey, your appellate practice, you're doing big brief writing. Yes, it's genius to have the law clerk write a memo or a letter to the client addressing their questions. But I'm thinking of other ways that you could do this with other types of law. If you have a transactional practice, maybe you hire a freelancer to write a big commercial lease agreement or a trust agreement, and you want them to prepare a summary of it that's written in plain English you can give to the client to try and ward off some questions. That might be another way to use the same technique if you have more of a transactional practice. Or again, maybe if you have a state court practice where you're doing a higher volume or even higher volume. I know Corey does a lot of cases. Maybe you're a family law attorney and you're having the freelancer help prepare responses to interrogatories for your client. And the client's given you a huge Word document, with all of the emotional arguments as well. And the freelancer sorts through that to find the substantive responses, form up objections. Well, why not have the law clerk also prepare a short memo or however long memo to the client of why other pieces of information weren't involved to try and ward off some of those concerns that you inevitably will deal with as the client attorney record. So I think no matter what your practice area and what you're using law clerk for, this is just a great practice to include that letter back to the client to try to answer their questions and maybe even prevent a few more return questions. So thank you for that great tip. What else? Let's see. One of the things that we hear from the freelancers is it can sometimes be challenging for them to get work done for the attorney if the attorney isn't responsive. And so how do you structure yourself to be available to the freelancer when they have questions and manage that working relationship, which is also very important?
Right. And I think that goes back to the help them help you. It's so important if you're asking people to work for you for a lower fee, for a fee that makes your firm profitable, that they're happy with you. It's no different than you not wanting to work with a difficult client, and it makes your life more difficult. And if they're not getting back to you, or they're just hard to work with, or they're rude, that makes that adds stress, and it makes you a lot of times want to charge more to deal with that particular client because you're
Sure.
going to be distracted and dealing with headaches. The same applies with dealing with these law clerks. They don't want to deal with difficult attorneys. That's not why they got into the freelance world. If they wanted that, they would go.
They'd go get a job at a firm. Yes.
Right. Exactly. Right. They don't want to be in that world. So giving them genuine compliments, and really meaning it. When they provide the draft of the brief, if I think they did an excellent job, one particular writer I can remember cited this law review article that was very relevant, and the judges took note of, in the brief, I thought, or in the opinion, I thought it was really sharp, so I told the writer, hey, I think this was really sharp how you included this. I really appreciate your help. I always thank them for taking on the project when they first sign on. And like I talked about at the beginning, I try to give them as much information as I can so they don't have to ask questions. I know it's inevitable and there are going to be some nuances.
For sure.
But you try to lay it out, give them a template. You spend a little more time on the front end and you'll spend less time on the back end, having to answer their questions. But, one possibility, and I've tried this a little bit, is having a paralegal or legal assistant or any type of administrative person at your firm, if you have one, sometimes respond to what may be non-legal questions. If they just say,
Okay.
it would help to have this other part of the transcript. I saw that wasn't uploaded. Can you provide that to me? That's something that maybe that person can get back to them on and follow up on. So if you have somebody in-house that you can kind of delegate even some of the communication, delegating within delegating, that's great. If not, I would just say to make it a priority. It's not the biggest deal in the world to answer a simple question. Maybe you block out an hour of your day or a half hour of your day for that time to just answer the law clerk's questions or the various law clerks, depending on how many projects you delegate, so that they get what they need so they can keep going. Because what you don't want is them hanging to where
Waiting
they're waiting
on
on you
Yeah.
and you're getting up against the deadline and they don't have what they need to get it done. And there are some times where they'll say, it really would help if I had this part of the transcript. And sometimes you have to say, it's not possible. Like, it's not feasible to get that part of the transcript right now. We're going to ask for an extension. But for now, because we want to get the client work product, please just get us what you can based on what we have. And then make a note that, when we get this other part of the transcript, we may address this other issue. So I think it's really important to get back to them. I think it's important to treat them, well, as you should in general, because they perceive you as the client, just as you perceive your client.
For sure.
And the more that you treat them with respect, the more they're going to want to work with you. I know that seems like basic advice, but I've found it to be helpful. Is that if they really like working with you, they want to just keep coming back and working with you. And sometimes they want to just work with you exclusively, especially if you're keeping them busy. So you can reward some of these law clerks by keeping them busy, continuing to feed them projects. If they're doing a great job, why not? And, as you alluded to before, even giving a bonus, you can change the scope of the project on LawClerk. And, there have been times where someone did a really good job on something, they went above and beyond, and I would just give them a little bonus. A little bit goes a long way with someone when you didn't even have to do it in the first place, and of course there's a gift card or something like that. If you've been working with someone all year and they're just knocking it out of the park for you and really helping you, little touches like that can help, but make it genuine. Obviously you're not,
Yes.
people can see through that. So I would look for something genuine about the person that I liked, about their writing, about the way they communicated, whatever. And I would tell them that, and I would make it a pleasant experience so that they would want to work with me above everyone else, because I get it. I've been where they are. I've been on that end of things, and there's nothing worse than having an attorney that's stressed out and difficult to work with and is not giving you what you need to get the project done.
Yeah, no, the legal work is hard enough as is without those complicating factors, for sure.
Yes.
For sure. So Corey, one of the things I talk a lot about is, to me, from my perspective, the two things I see attorneys taking full advantage of when they're having success with delegating through LawClerk is, number one, Teams feature, building out Teams, which I know you've done. Number two is taking time to work with their dedicated law clerk advisor, their advisor. And I'd love to hear your experience. You've gotten to know your advisor a little bit, have him on speed dial, I think. What are some ways people can collaborate with their advisor when they have questions or they're not sure how to get work all the way
Yeah,
done? Yeah.
right. I mean, I've had great experiences with Patrick, who is our advisor for a long time. He's from Seattle, like I am, so
That's
we
right.
bonded right away. And go Hawks, go Seahawks. And
They won
he,
yesterday, right?
they
I think
did, yeah,
so.
5-0.
Okay.
Not that anybody's paying
Nice.
attention, but but he is, just it was really nice to be able to kind of bounce a question off him. Like, for example, there was a brief that we needed a Montana attorney,
Oh,
which is
wow.
kind
Okay.
of a niche. We needed an attorney that was licensed in Montana who knew a very nuanced area of Montana law. And I
Okay.
thought, well, if I post this, I may not necessarily get someone from Montana that's going to necessarily see it or jump on it.
Right.
So I thought, let me ask Patrick if he knows somebody. And sure enough, he did. He had some ideas for some people to send our way. Other things can come up if I really haven't had any negative experiences that I could speak of, but if there was once a writer that was just too busy and kind of expressed to Patrick that she was too busy to take on a project, but I think she felt uneasy telling me, because she liked working with me, and so he kind of was that buffer. And I told him, like, tell her
Yep.
no problem, we'll reassign it, no big deal. But it was just kind of nice to know that it's not just you and that writer. Like, if something were to go south, um, you have somebody that will get back to you right away through LawClerk. It's not just you and that writer and kind of the wild, wild west of like, well, I hope this person comes through, because if they get sick or disappear or just flake out and not want to work on this, I have nowhere to go. That's
Yeah.
not the case.
Yeah.
If something like that were to happen, I would let Patrick know. He would, immediately help me reassign it. We'd figure something out. I never had that experience, in working with LawClerk at all. And I'm thankful for that. But yeah, I think just having somebody there to kind of answer those questions has been very helpful.
I think that's a great example where you're talking about the Montana attorney, things like that come up, and, we have ways on the back end to go pull a list of all of the freelancers in Montana, and sometimes reaching out to them directly with an email or a phone call. In addition, yeah, they get the project post notification, but sometimes people are busy and they don't see it. So we do have ways to pull levers and try to get certain types of freelancers' attention when issues like that come up. So definitely lean on your advisor for that. And also, like you said, lean on your advisor if ever you're having problems or someone's not communicating. We have a network of thousands of attorneys. It's inevitable. There's going to be issues once in a while, and life happens. And thankfully, we only have problems on less than 1% of our projects. So, we've got a great track record, but I think a lot of that is due to the hard work of our advisors to try to ward off problems before they become really big issues. So thank you for sharing that. Now, we've talked a lot about your appellate practice and the actual substantive legal work. Do you ever collaborate with freelancers through LawClerk or otherwise for non-legal things in your practice?
Absolutely. And I would
Okay.
advise it. And kind of like I was saying before, the delegating becomes addicting. You start realizing that once you kind of remove that guilt, because again, I had that guilt. I had that feeling of like, I feel like I'm cheating. I feel like I'm doing something wrong. Or I feel like I'm taking money to pay for something that I should do myself. I mean, it's kind of like, with your house, some people will hire a house cleaner, but sometimes you have that guilt of like, well, this is something I could do, or I could mow my lawn, or, things like
Right.
that. And I was always someone who's that way of like, look, if I can do it, I'd rather just take care of it and put in the elbow grease than have someone else do it. But it just, again, doesn't become sustainable when it starts
Yeah.
affecting, it's like either my well-being and my, stress and my ability to have a life versus being okay with delegating some work. And again, it's not some dirty secret that you're not telling your client. You tell your client, you should tell your
Yes.
client up front that you are going to be working with someone on this, that the person is going to, be doing a lot of the work, and you think that they're a phenomenal attorney and they know this area of law well, or these are their credentials. Like I you know, I like to throw out those credentials because I'm not somebody that went to Harvard Law, and so I can look at someone and say, "Gosh, this person has good credentials, and this person can write an amazing brief. This person was the number one top of their class." I mean, that says something. So when you tell the
Yeah.
client you're working with someone that was the top of their class at this Ivy League school, or whatever it is, or they law clerk for a federal judge. I had another attorney that law clerked for a judge, that was pretty high
Wow.
up. That's a real selling point to tell your client. So I think
For
that
sure.
removing that guilt and delegating, once you start doing it, you start realizing that, okay, this is freeing up my time. I'm not jeopardizing my client's case. I'm not jeopardizing the work product, because at the end of the day, your name's on it. So you're going to be reviewing it. You're going to be making sure that it's how it should be. You're going to be making any changes that are necessary to work in that client's best interest. So I think it's so when it comes to the non-legal tasks, it's because it becomes addicting, and because you realize how helpful it is. You can start applying it to other things that you frankly don't want to do. Things that either just don't gel well with your skill set, but you kind of have to do it, or things that you could be spending time to benefit your client in another way. And so things like, for me, I would draft a petition for writ of habeas corpus, to be filed in federal court. So I would draft the memorandum, or I would delegate the drafting of the memorandum. And then there's this form that you have to fill out. And it's technically just a form, and you're listing where the client was convicted, what superior court, did they have direct appeal, were there any other post-conviction petitions that they filed? It's basic information, but it's a headache. It's just time consuming, and you're filling out a form, and that's not fun, necessarily. And so I just started delegating those. I said, I can put the memorandum that either the writer wrote and tell them to also do the form. They drafted the whole memorandum. They know this.
They know it. Yeah.
So might as well just have them do the form too. And people were more than willing to do it. Also things like just a letter to the client, kind of diagnosing a legal issue, or even a preliminary letter about the case and how you expect it to go, or just how you expect a certain legal issue, kind of these are the strengths and weaknesses of your case. Those are things that you can delegate to somebody that really has the time to narrowly research that particular subject, so you don't have to, or just some kind of traditional paralegal tasks. I found that attorneys on LawClerk are willing to do those things, and it's usually not going to be a high price. And maybe for them, it's like, hey, this is something easy I can knock out in between the brief I'm writing, or something like that. So again, you don't know unless you try. There is no harm in posting something on LawClerk, even if it doesn't seem traditional, even if it's a blog about a subject that you want to put on your website.
There you go. Yeah.
Just give it a try and see if someone picks it up. And usually there's more than one person that's applying. So I definitely would highly advise delegating any non-legal tasks that you don't have time to deal with, you don't want to deal with. Like I said, once you start doing it, you're going to start to see the value in delegating. And I think you're going to, realize that it's not only in your best interest, stress-wise and otherwise, but it's also in your client's best interest to have kind of their best their best attorney that's fresh and is utilizing the resources that they have.
I think that's just great advice. And, thank you so much for sharing your story. If anyone has any more questions or comments, please go ahead and start dropping those in the chat. But Socorro, you shared that your, working with freelancers helped you staff a fast-paced growing firm to do it in a profitable way. And that ultimately led to selling your practice last year. So tell us what you're working on now. Are you still practicing law?
So I am kind of transitioning out of practicing law. I am now kind of doing the business development and sales at the firm. And it was just a match made in heaven. The new owner is a great person, and he really is good at managing. So he has kind of that same entrepreneurial vision that, I think
Awesome.
he's always had. I, again, came from it out of necessity of like, this isn't sustainable. How else do I operate? But he really knows how to kind of look at the big picture. He before purchasing the law firm, actually helped, after being an attorney for a number of years in litigation and appellate law, started helping other attorneys manage their law firms. And so he does have this kind of non-traditional view of working virtually and doing a lot of things through Clio, using technology to make things easier, automating things that could be automated. You obviously can't automate a brief and something that's substantive to your client's case, but you can automate certain intro letters. It's saying this is what an appeal is, or certain kind of things that really just can be automated and you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. So yeah, now I'm doing mostly business development and sales. I still am kind of helping to manage the new team that he's brought on. He's brought on, a couple of attorneys in-house. One really intelligent idea he had was to have an attorney, not a paralegal, but an actual attorney at the firm whose sole job is to communicate with the clients. So, so at the intro, when the client hires the firm, they're introduced to that attorney, and that attorney is going to make sure to be responsive to that client, is going to make sure to that they get drafts right away. That, that was something that gives a lot of clients security of like, oh, good, I'm going to be able to reach someone. Again, if you're a solo attorney, it's really hard. That communication piece is really a big deal. And so having an attorney that just does that is also a great way to kind of delegate and take that communication piece out of your hair. Yes. And so I think that the new owner thought that it was worth it to have an attorney actually doing that because of our large volume of cases that we have. And it's really worked out well. So
that's great.
Kind of realized that, practicing law wasn't necessarily my passion. I kind of accepted that. I mean, there were parts of it I liked. I had some oral arguments in the Supreme Court, and that was exciting and memorable, and something that I appreciate being able to do. But at the end of the day, I think that you have to kind of do what you like. And if you're miserable and stressed out about something, you have to make a change. That's kind of what I want to project to people. So many people just accept, like, this is my lot in life. This is how it's got to be. This is how all attorneys feel. And maybe a lot of attorneys do feel that way, but it's because they're not taking those steps. And I was looking around at other attorneys that did make some changes, and they were happier and they were enjoying what they were doing. So I feel like, no one should feel like they're stuck, in where they are, in the way they run their practice, or whether they want to be an attorney at all. If anybody has any questions about selling their practice, the person that was the broker was phenomenal, and that's what he specializes in, is selling law firms. So I'd be more than happy to field any questions. If anyone wants to email me either about anything we talked about today or about selling your practice, please feel free. I'm always happy.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Well, I love what you're saying there about, all too many attorneys do wear the misery of the practice of law as a badge of honor. And I could not agree with you more that it doesn't have to be that way. And I'm so glad that you are finding ways to do law better, that we're all working together to have that conversation and find new tools and resources. So Corey, thank you for helping shine the light on how you've used outsourcing, and especially how you've used it via LAWCLERK to help grow and scale your firm. I think it's something very worthwhile to note that, outsourcing is not a dirty little secret, like you said. In fact, it's more of a secret weapon once you find the power of it and the results that it can generate for your client and also for your firm. Now, Corey dropped a lot of great information about navigating the LAWCLERK system and maximizing it today. He talked about scope changes and things. Any of those things, if you're not quite sure how to do it, reach out to us. Again, your advisor is a phenomenal resource and can help teach you, do a demo, all of those good things. So if there's anything you heard today that you're like, well, how do I do that? Just reach out. We'll help walk you through. There's no secrets here. But I want to thank everyone for joining us for another in our webinar series. And Corey, especially want to thank you for your time, being so willing to share your insight. This was far surpassed all my expectations. I really enjoyed this hour together, and thank you so much.
Likewise. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, if you enjoyed this conversation, be sure next week we're having another similar conversation with attorney Crystal McDonough, who's built a really specialized energy law practice, largely while traveling the country in her luxury RV with her family. So if you want to hear about some other interesting attorneys that are doing law better, doing law differently, next week we're talking to Crystal on, I believe, October 20th. So that's it for today, folks. Thank you for joining us. And again, thank you to Corey Parker.